Today we're going to have Tien is sitting in for Juan, so this is Juan, Tien, one and the same. CBIA, Gary will not be here today. I have not heard from Cesar, and I'm sure Kathy Hicks,
she's running late.
She's running late, but she will be sitting in for Richard. So welcome, good morning. Anything new? All right, ready to go. Hey. Just kind of a little bit of an overview. You'll notice that we did send out the pending items list. One thing that does need to be added to it that was inadvertently left off is the AB 127 6%. The board left it open and directed it to come back to IMP for discussion. So that does need to be discussed. And like I sent out in my email, while we won't have the expenditure report interest/savings presented by OPSC, we at the IMP can have conversation and talk about what we agree, what we like, what we don't like, and if there's consensus, you know, OPSC can take our suggestions into consideration as they're redrafting their report. So I think that is actually a very valid conversation. That's why I sent the email out afterwards, even though that we had pulled the item because OPSC didn't have time to look at the new legal opinion and update the report. I still think, because I sent it to every one of you, that if you have opinions or comments that we can take them at the appropriate time. Anything else on the pending item list that I have missed or we want to have added and discussed? Seeing and hearing none. All right. We are moving on, and next is the remaining schedule for 2010. And I know, Bill, you had something you wanted to say about July 8th.
I won't be able to attend on July 8th, but it does conflict with a cash board of directors meeting.
Has there been any request differently? I know. Is anybody else going to be up at that meeting?
Maybe it's not major.
Okay.
Get a pinch hitter.
All right. I will. Or maybe we take that one as a slightly shorter IMP meeting into consideration if we're going to have more than a couple missing. So as the time gets close, I'll send out an email. So just put a little star by that, because if I know already a couple of people are going to be out, I will send out an email. I will ask you again in June, just to double check. So, but if everybody else can make it, we'll still keep it on the 8th. And then December is always as needed, depending on time, quickness, how fast we have to go with certain things. Then I also want to put on your calendar, as I'm sure you saw the notice, but next week, May 12th, from 2 to 5, it's the Subcommittee on Priority and School Construction Funding. We are going to have the subcommittee hearing, which is chaired by Cynthia, and then Scott Harvey and Kathleen Moore are on that. And so that'll be the time to, one, please thank you for those who have given me their input on looking at something different rather than the FIFO structure. Get to me your thoughts, comments ASAP so I can get them on to the subcommittee. But we're mostly going to be taking the direction of the board. And then the items that were left open to be discussed, that's what the subcommittee is going to be discussing and how to handle and look at those. So please, if you have comments, send them in or join in on the fun, May 12th. It's will be at 1020 N Street, so LOB across the street. Room 100, so on the first floor. So if you're on the N Street side, directly across from the Capitol, on your right-hand side. And it will also be webcast as well if you are unable to make it and want to submit comments or letters from there. And then, yes, Dennis, 1020 N Street. Yeah. And then also want to put on your radar, yes, I'm a little nuts to have back-to-back meetings, but the next subcommittee meeting on rules and procedures will be the day before the SAB meeting on the 25th from 3:30 to 5, and we will be following up, and that will also be webcast, and we will be following up on the subcommittee's direction to, one, they directed that they would like to follow Senate rules / Masons, and then adopt some of rules that are specific to the SAB that are not specifically addressed in Masons or Senate rules of what they would like to run through. So we're going to be going through that and hopefully be able to kind of finalize certain rules on that so that it can go to the full board for consideration and adoption. And again, so if you have thoughts and considerations, please send those in, and then you know the SAB meeting's on the 26th. So I think that's it for announcements as to what's upcoming. So we get to high performance. Welcome. Thank you. Welcome back.
Thanks.
Brian, all you.
Thanks. Good morning. I have with me Tim Hegedus from OPSC, Lydia Barone, and Teresa Townsend from DSA, who've been very helpful throughout this whole process. Just to kind of recap where we were at coming off of last month's meeting and the SAB last month. After last month's implementation meeting, we had a third work group meeting, and we discussed a lot of the same things that we had been discussing last month, but we had a shift in the main proposal that we had been talking about, the chips and cash proposal, that included at the time it included a doubling of the funding model that we currently had in regulation, and adding $150,000 for minimally qualifying new construction projects and $250,000 for mod projects. Since then, Cash actually came forward and said that they would like to adopt the point system that OPSC proposed last month, and along with the kind of the Tier 1 or the starter kit grant, as it was referred to previously. So that's nice. So we had kind of buy off on the proposed changes that we had last month, and the points changes. I think everybody thought that. At least the overwhelming consensus in the room, I think, last month was that those points were kind of honing in on the correct things. So we're glad for that. Moving forward to today, we've made very minimal changes to the regulations as you saw them last month. The only things that we've changed, there was talk about the difficulty in meeting the minimum acoustical requirements, and especially modernization projects. So. We even talked about in the third work group, and I think even a little bit last month here, we talked about possibly even eliminating that prerequisite. But the more we talked about eliminating it, the more we got. We got some feedback that people didn't think that was a good idea. It could compromise the overall greening of a building if you don't meet all the requirements that are prerequisites, and so. Instead of eliminating it, what we've done is we've actually attached 2 more points to it. So it's gone from 0 to 2 last month and now to 4 this month. So we now have, instead of 21, 23 additional points that are available in all the various categories. I'll cover those in a minute just to kind of remind everybody exactly what they all are. And of those 23 points, 9 of them are now prerequisites. So any project, the way we brought it forward last month is, any project that had say 20 points would now have 27. Now it would be 20 to 29. So I think you're going to see in some examples here. If you look on, I believe it's, let's see. I'm sorry. The bottom of stamp page 4, you'll see an example. And this is an example that we had in last month. And this is a new construction example. We have also a modernization example. But if you have a base grant for a new construction project of $30 million, and that would have had 34 points in the high performance rating criteria, that would result in a high performance grant of $705,000. With the 9 additional points, just prerequisites only now, that would turn to 43 points and just over $1.4 million. So it effectively doubles the grant. In addition to now the $250,000 grant that we're going to have for minimally qualifying projects. So it's quite an increase, as you can see. Below that, on stamp page 5, we have an example of how it would affect a modernization project. We used 38 high performance rating criteria points because Of the mod projects that DSA has reviewed thus far, the average is 38 points. So we thought that'd be a good average. The average base grant for a modernization project historically is right around $2 million, so that's kind of where we honed in on for our example. 38 points would result in a 3.31% increase currently the way the regs are written, which would be for a $2 million base grant project, $66,200 for the high performance grant. If you were to add the 9 prerequisite points that we have now, that would change 3.31% to 6.16 and actually result in a $123,200 grant. So it also, you can see it doubles that as well in that example. It's also important to note that there's 14 more points that are still available that could be achieved and that could drive the grant up even more. Following down below, you can see exactly where we added our points in each of the categories. Under water, this is kind of just a recap, like I said, of last month. The water, we changed the points of maximum points of 2 to 3 for reducing potable water for landscaping and for indoor water. There's a lot of points in the energy category now. We added 2 for meeting minimum energy requirements. The prerequisite there, it's 2 points now. We added a section for plug loads monitored by energy management systems worth 1 point, and we increased the renewable energy credits by a lot. There's a lot of points there in renewable energy. We're hoping that'll spur people on to try to do more renewable energy on their sites. There's another prerequisite there for fundamental building systems testing and training that now has a point, and we increased the enhanced commissioning from a maximum of 2 points to a maximum of 4 points. Following down the materials category, there's also a couple of prerequisites there that we attached a point to, and then in the indoor environmental quality section, as I mentioned before, we now have the minimal acoustical requirement is worth 4 points for every project. We still have the reference in there to the current California Energy Code that we included last month. And we added a $250,000 base incentive grant for both new construction and modernization projects that meet the minimum threshold for getting the high performance incentive grants. So that's per the board's direction last month. One idea about that grant, and actually about all these grants that's still kind of swirling around, is the cash and chips proposal, and this discussion at the board last month was somewhat focused on the idea of whether there'd be a match or no match involved for these grants. We're still in the process of getting our legal opinions, and it's still a topic that is at this point it's unresolved, and so we're going to continue that discussion today. But primarily, what we want to talk about today is that last section in our item. We want to talk about how to, and we're seeking input from the industry experts that we have here and all of you. We want to know how we can possibly facilitate participation by financial hardship districts. What are those barriers? How can we solve that problem? How can we get them on board a little more easily? And then also, we really would like to know, because Senator Hancock specifically said in her motion in April that she wanted to invest in data collection. She wanted these grants to be going out and that we're getting data back so that we know and we can actually quantify how much these high performance building components cost people and how much they, how much, are these grants the proper level now? Are we putting them at the proper level? Do we need to alter them moving forward? So we really need to know from all of you how we're going to do that. What's the best method for collecting the data that we need in order to provide the documentation, kind of like the backup and the justification for these grants. So that's really what I'm hoping that we can focus on today. It's definitely a priority for us and for the SAB. So that's kind of what we're geared at today. I think with that we can open it up now.
Okay. I think first I want to kind of go through and look at the language as it's been proposed, if there's any changes let me know, and then we can go in through and discuss how we would write and include facility hardships, how we'd potentially collect data, and then after we get through what the board direction specifically was, open it up to other issues that I know there wasn't clear direction or there's a bit confusion on what the board direction was, one of it being allowing the third-party independent review, lead chips certified, and then we just got the DSA letter, which mentions other things. So again, just to kind of be clear in the order of what I want to do is go through and look at OPSC's language. Does that work? How it's written? Does it address that? How do we handle adding in facility hardships? How do we handle the collection of the data? Then open it up to other areas.
Financial hardship.
Oh, financial. Did I say, just bought me on the head. Which was clear board direction on those issues, and then open it up to other issues which there may have been confusion on board direction on, or as I got DSA's letter, maybe certain things to think about, which if we think about these and we kind of come to consensus, what the direction needs to be is that then OPSC and maybe the working group needs to get together to finalize regulatory language of what that would look like. So when it does go before the board, if the board does decide to adopt or take on some of these issues that were not discussed in the board direction, there is regulatory language in front of them so that they can, see that and adopt it at that time. Does that make sense? We good with this plan? All right. So let's open it up to any comments on the language as prepared by OPSC. Yes, Bill.
Regarding the language that's attached here, starting on stamp page 7, it does incorporate the $250,000 starter grant on page 11 and on page 9, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. But then I have this letter from DSA, which is not agreeing with that approach. What's the relationship between those two things?
There is actually no relationship.
Excellent.
The board gave direction, and we are here to implement board direction. If the board chooses to change its mind, that's for the board to discuss in May. That's not for us to discuss. Tien?
Yes, I know Senator Hancock already said 250,000 for all the project, but it's just to think out of the box, and the incentive grant is to give as an incentive. That means if we can use this, really treat it as an incentive. For example, the highest HP point get more incentive, and then grant money, and then that will really stimulate the school district go to reach the highest point on HP, the high performance. So that's one option there that we can probably think about, even though Senator Hancock already mentioned 250K there. So it's a sliding scale, proportional and based on the high performance point. So if that can work, we can kind of brainstorm on that also.
And I will again say thank you, Tien, but that was not part of board direction, so therefore it is not open for discussion today at Implementation Committee. We are here to implement board direction, and board direction said 250 starter grant for everybody. So if the board wishes to have the discussion of sliding scale, you can bring that up and send letters into the board for the board to discuss it in its final direction. But again, Brian and Tim, you guys are going to be busy, have sample regulatory language of what potentially a sliding scale might look like. And if OPSC is proposing a sliding scale, then I would hope that OPSC then presents the language they would like the sliding scale to look like. But again, I am not going to entertain that discussion here because that was not part of board direction. I'm going to be very clear in that we were given a task. Senator Hancock said do this, so that's what we're going to do. And if you got other stuff, you got to go to the board, because that's not what the board had us do, was consider other stuff. Are we okay with the language of specifically, Bill, as you mentioned, 9 and 11, the board shall, on where it says shall provide $250,000 for the incentive grant? we kind of parsed it each way of like, oh, you have to say incentive grant or whatnot. It's like, no, it's just straight up, you meet the minimum points, you get $250,000. And Senator Hancock was very clear that that is both for new and modernization. Yeah, Rob?
And just, I think Brian touched on that, and so we're still questioning whether or not that's a match is required to the $250,000, right?
Yeah, I think, I believe bond counsel has yet to kind of weigh in on that, so we're waiting to hear, I guess, the final determination.
And actually, what the determination is going on right now is the chair and Senator Hancock are working together to get a clean legal opinion, but for purposes of discussion today, let's assume that a matching grant is not part of this discussion. It is an incentive. It is not needed to have matching, and we'll just go from that point and let legal counsel and the board, depending on that, go from there. But at this point, it is just
a
incentive.
quick follow-up.
Okay.
We talked about it last month as well, but is that subject to the 60% commensurate test as well, that incentive grant?
Yes, it would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Bill?
I think as a practical matter, at least for our school district, and for the projects that that OPSC has reviewed, our high-performance schools projects, the base grant amount that we receive for modernization, we do all like-in-kind replacements. We demolish all of our schools and build them over again because we have local funds to do that. So we get a base grant for modernization, say for a 400 or 500 student school of what, $1.8 million, $2 million. Our project costs are in the neighborhood of $25 to $30 million. And so I think as a practical matter, we would be more than matching the costs, and many districts are more than matching any kind of an incentive grant costs in this kind of a situation, just from practical standpoint. So it's not a huge issue for probably a lot of districts that have made a high-performance schools commitment based upon their local bond funding sources and the board's direction and the community's interest in pursuing green schools.
Yep. Dennis?
I wanted to go back to what the question that Rob asked. Brian, you said that the $250,000 would be subject to the 60% commensurate review. That the 60% is only construction cost, and it's my understanding that a lot of that $250,000 grant was intended to be used for design costs, analysis costs up front, which would be separate from the 60% commensurate. Correct?
That's true. That's something that we can definitely discuss. I suppose I don't think we've actually really spent a great deal of time discussing that. So maybe that's something that we ought to talk about.
So, but
today.
as it's written, there is a $250 if you meet the minimum base grant, and it's not subject. There's nothing in here that says that it's subject. Is that a policy, or is that a regulatory change?
We base our 60% commensurate on the DSA's cost estimate on the DSA tracker website, and the total project costs for the project that we have in-house minus site acquisition.
Okay, so have we applied the 60% commensurate
Thus far we have, yes.
on HPI?
Yes, we have.
So, and that's been applied on the points? But just based on the points, how much money you get?
If a project was $2 million and part of that $2 million was a $50,000 high-performance grant,
then that
it wouldn't be subtracted out. The $2 million would be used
okay.
for 60% commensurate.
60%. So are you saying that then the $250,000 base incentive would be considered and added on towards meeting that 60% commensurate?
It would be included in the amount that is compared with the DSA tracker, yeah.
Is that normal?
Yes, that's the way it's been handled so far.
You're doing that with the base grant currently.
Right.
Right.
Okay, so
But that was kind of my point, Dennis. I didn't go into that, but whether it's commissioning, pre-design, design work, I see that as a soft cost pot of money, not construction cost, but that's just me.
And yeah, I agree, and I was misinterpreting that. I think what Brian was saying was that it's included in the total funding as a basis for the 60%, but it's not necessarily the construction cost that is included in the 60%.
Well, I suppose it's, if we're talking about the 250, how do we know? I don't know what portion of that's going to be used for soft costs and what portion might be used for construction. So I think it'd be pretty hard to bifurcate that. It'd be different for every project, I think.
Yeah, can I comment on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it will vary significantly by project. And in the analysis that I prepared, I shared with Senator Hancock's office, I mean, I came up with about a 2/3, 1/3, roughly, about $180,000 in consultant and upfront costs, but also including commissioning. The commissioning is one of the biggest dollar value items in there, and then the rest of it would be applied as for cost increases for hard costs for elements in green schools that have significant costs that are far beyond the dollar value that the points fund. Good examples of those are renewable energy systems, HVAC window interlocks, et cetera, things like that. There's some real high price tag items in there that a lot of districts walk away from in high performance that could provide the state and the school district with significant energy savings, and this will incentivize us to adopt those points. Because remember, as we go through the goal setting for green schools in the process of the design, we are always looking at, okay, what does it cost to implement this criteria element as a green schools piece, and what are we going to get back for it? You know, what's the upfront reward, the downstream, what's the state going to give us on the percentage? And so we make a call in the design phase, yeah, we're either going to go for this point or we're not, you know. And frankly, on renewable energy, we mostly don't go for them because the money we get back and the cost of the systems are so out of whack that we just don't make that decision to go. So anyway, I think this will help us make a call to adopt further green schools components in our projects.
So, as included right now, the $250,000 is the base incentive, and then the total of that incentive is included in the 60% commensurate. And we have consensus, understanding that's the normal project process. We're not looking to change any of that. We okay with that?
I'm trying to think through this process because I hadn't thought of it being as part of the commensurate. But thinking of if we throw that $250,000 in the base, and that skews the fees to where it's a higher percentage, I think we need to take a look at that, how it's going to affect the 60% to see if that doesn't need to be adjusted, because fees are the biggest portion of the other 40%, and it may skew that 60%.
So, Brian, do you think, because I'm thinking after this meeting we might need to have an HPI working group to kind of go through and figure out some of these, do you see this as needs to be addressed regulatory, or is this a policy discussion we can bring back?
It's a policy discussion.
It's a policy discussion. So I'm going to kind of mark this down as a policy, because if there is a current practice, and I know we're looking to change practice, but right now, in terms of getting the regulations cooked, let's make sure we get the regulations cooked.
Let me just add one thing. The architects currently do certify that the project meets 60% commensurate on the 5004 form, which is technically regulation. So it's maybe a kind of a twofold discussion then.
How about this? Can you find out some answers before the next working group meeting?
Yeah.
I think as a practical matter, you're going to end up with the only real impact being on much smaller projects where you're kind of, you know what I mean, scraping in the line and getting, at that area. That's going to
some of the mod projects.
Very, very small mod projects. Yeah, I think that's where you're going to have the potential, as practically speaking, of.
Well, those that are kind of more in tune and see this, any suggestions? So that's your to-do list. Add right now. Dennis, Bill, and those. Yeah, yes, Mr. Smoot, if you want to come up and you have an answer, we shall not digress from this point. Mr. Smoot, I expect answers. You've been around. You have history. You have knowledge.
I'm too old for that. Thank you. Lyle Smoot, representing Los Angeles Unified School District. I don't have an answer. I just want to make a point that if there is no match requirement, then this issue of whether it's part of the 60% commensurate test or not becomes a lot more important. If there is a match, I think it's kind of irrelevant one way or the other at that point, because if you have a match, then it has to be part of the, total project cost somehow or other, and probably works within the 60% commensurate test. But without a match, I just have no idea how you would include that in the 60% test, because that's only hard construction costs right now.
Perfect. Thank you, Lyle.
Thank
You
you.
actually provided clarification. Mavon?
I just wanted to say that, as you know, Senator Lowenthal is carrying legislation on this same issue. And it was not envisioned that there would be a 60% commensurate at all with high performance. And I'll tell you why. It's an incentive program. And if districts are going to be fearful that the money that they've spent doesn't count, then they're going to stay away from the program. This is a pot of money, a finite pot of money that we're trying to get, some behavior changes. And I'm concerned that when you start adding on layers of, well, yeah, we're giving you this except for, we're going to be losing interest. And so I'm kind of surprised that we're going down this road of the 60% commensurate.
Thanks,
That's
Mavon.
just, we're not adding that. That's the way these grants have been apportioned.
Well,
till now.
I think that those were decisions that were made internally. That's not something the board has been aware of, that there was a 60% commensurate test being applied to high performance. I think the board has their vision locked on this program right now, and they will be paying attention to those sorts of things. So I would say, again, as the implementation committee, you experts out there in the field who know the behavior of districts, I would caution you not to assume because other programs are treated that way that this program needs to be treated that way. Thank you.
So this is definitely something that I think also hinges on what the legal counsel opinion comes up with, because if they say, sweet, you're fine, no incentive, kind of opens up the door to going down Lyle's road of, how do you have the 60% apply to an incentive grant? And if a match is required, then it opens up, and then we have the discussion that Mavon just brought up. Is this the intent that the board in wanting the HPI applied to the 60%? So I think we can kind of close the door on this and get back to language. Any other suggestion, amendments, language? Bill?
I just wanted to comment on the the addition of the sentence on the top of stamp page 9, and I guess it's on more than one page, regarding the submission of the plans at the time they're submitted for DSA review must include a request for high performance plan verification. Could I just confirm with Lydia or Teresa? Come on, Lydia, you can do it. Isn't this what's required now?
Yeah.
I mean, in other words, right? Okay, go ahead. Never mind.
It's the intent of what's happening now, but we've had situations where people are submitting after they have a stamp at DSA. And so they have been pointing to this line as being their basis for doing so. And we wanted to have a revision so it would, from this day forward, be part of that.
Okay, and because the only reason I said it that way is because we submitted a few after the fact in the early days, and then we were told, put them in when you put their plans in, and that was fine. So we did that. That's what we're doing now, and that's a good way to go. But remember, the concern that I guess districts would have, we can apply for modernization funding under an OPSC program retroactively, essentially, after the work is done. Right? So how do we accommodate, in other words, am I correct there, OPSC people here? Just want to make sure, because I believe we can. In other words, there's no time limit. Once occupancy occurs in new construction, you can't apply for that grant. But in modernization, you can apply essentially on a retroactive basis for a funding from OPSC. So we'll need to make sure that we have a way that we can deal with that. If a district wants to come in with a modernization set of plans, we want to pay the fee to DSA, have it reviewed for HPI, and then put that in with the application.
DSA, do you see that being an issue? Is there something that we need to
I said pay
consider.
the fee. You heard that, right?
As long as he said the fee, I'm okay with it, but I need to defer to staff in terms of, it shouldn't affect the timing, though, for us, because the structural access and fire life safety happen independent anyway, so, and if you're coming back after the fact, it's already been approved, so what they're working with and your fee are all okay anyway, so.
Our only concern is if the plans affect fire life safety or structural or access, then they'd have to go back through that. So that's the risk they would take.
They have to have an approved set of plans to go forward to OPSC for funding. So they're talking about a plan that has already been approved and they are having to build to whatever's in that plan. When they come back subsequently, they have to submit the same exact set of plans to you to do the HPI review on.
It wouldn't be, shouldn't be any changes to them.
Okay.
It should just be that the high performance
If there's
components
any
weren't
changes,
previously
you pay us
reviewed.
an additional fee to
Right.
relook at it.
Fred, I see. Fred, I see you looking confused.
That's my normal state.
Is that Rob?
Just to, I don't want to state the obvious again, but the board's direction was to get, they want to see more activity in this program. This might end up leading to less activity in the program. And so I would hate to
Well-
kick a project out of eligibility in the program because they come in for the HPI review after they already have a DSA stamp, or in Bill's case, you're coming in for reimbursement on a project you've completed.
So how would, but Teresa, I'll leave it, because staff is going to be looking at, is the policy, would this language prevent that happening?
Can I give you an example?
Sure.
Please.
So, for instance, if your Title 24 calculations are affected and they don't meet the points that you want, and then you go back and you make some changes to the plans, it might include the wall assembly, it might include the ceiling assembly. This could affect the review by fire life safety and structural, and we need to be aligned so that they don't come in after the fact, think that everything's fine, and our structural people go out to the field and find out that the plans have changed immensely.
And so I appreciate that intent, that the way this is worded, the use of the word must means you're out. So I understand that, and I think we as districts need to be aware if you come in for HPI, it could dramatically change structural or fire and life safety, but the way this reg is worded, if you come in after you originally submit for access, fire, life safety, structural, you can't come back for HPI. Well, I think you can. That's not the way this reg's worded. So
Hold on, because one of the things I want us to take a look at is they also struck out must be up above. So must has always been included in the language of this. I think we need to clarify to make sure the language allows for a clear, consistent use and policy for how it's handled at DSA. So I had Bill and then Deborah, if you wanted to say something. Bill's first.
I yield my time to Deborah.
Okay. All right. Gentlemen. No, I will allow you to be gentlemanly.
Well, I just asked Kathy the same question, but so you have a new project and you're out, and then you decide you want to go back. Didn't you just say that you could resubmit under the high performance?
But then the further clarification was to that, to the extent that you cause your high performance review is indicates, or you're doing something, if you're building exactly what was approved the first time around, and now you're just bringing it back to have that same exact set of plans reviewed for high performance, no problem, you just have to pay the high performance fee. If you're proposing to do something different, you're now in the construction phase and you're going to add some additional green high performance components to your plan, you've now changed your plans, and we have another problem, because you could now have structural problems or whatever, and it depends on scope change and all sorts of issues.
But we have a way to deal with that, in which we do every day, which is we file a change order with the Division of State Architect and we get it approved. I guess all I would say is I think we need to make sure that we don't set up something that is going to prohibit districts to come back in, and we're talking in some cases after a project may be built, potentially, or even occupied. And I know this, but with modernization, you can come in at any time. You don't have to come in prior to the occupancy of the school. And so I just want us to make sure you could just put as a clause, except in the case of a modernization project seeking funding under OPS, well, something like that. And I don't think it's impossible to deal with it from the DSA standpoint, and we understand the issues related to if you're changing something and there's a change in the work, we go to DSA. That's what we do. That's our life.
It's normal. No, Dennis?
Yeah, I agree with what Bill says on having the opportunity to come in later, but I wanted to get back to what Kathy was saying. You said that there's a mechanism if a district submits their structural access compliance and fire and life safety sets, and then while those are being checked, they come in with a high performance. You have a method to deal with that. Is that what you're saying?
Is that the 6 weeks?
That works?
One of
Because
the
that's not what this change in the regulations say. This says that all 4 of them have to be submitted at the same time, and once you submit, the line is
We would prefer
drawn.
that when you submit your plans to us, that you give us a complete set of plans,
I understand.
including the HPI. It's not prohibitive that, it's the first time I've seen the language, actually, but
Yeah.
it is possible for us to deal with it coming in after the fact and dealing with the situation that Bill described on a mod project where you're coming in after the fact for a reimbursement.
Okay.
So I don't know that this
So-
language is necessarily written to capture exactly what they were trying to do. But our preference is that they all come in at one time.
I think from a policy standpoint, this is I think we should submit complete plans and that high performance should happen while the review happens and everything goes out the door at the same time. I think this is a noble effort and it should be the way that regular projects go. I think it's good, except I just want us to make sure that we create an exception for a project that is eligible for funding after the fact, a modernization project, that they could still participate in the program.
Okay,
That's
we've
all.
got
sorry.
Sean, Teresa, then Brian, then Dennis.
I would like to request that this provision not be changed. It sounds like this is something that DSA should be enforcing and that it doesn't necessarily need to be in the SFP regulations.
They are enforcing it.
So, Teresa?
I wanted to comment that we do have online that we will accept the energy Title 24 calculations at this time, and we allow the documentation for the HPI to trickle in after, because it's not. But the idea is that you've got one set of plans, just make one extra set for us and let us know what your intent are. And also, the Title 24 is required at that time, so nothing can change. So then we check it, and after about 6 weeks, we'd like to see the documentation, and we'll work with you on that, because that's something that might trail, and we have that as an option if somebody wants that. So we're open to that documentation. Is that still acceptable?
Brian?
That's the way we've been working it.
I was going to suggest that maybe we go forward with the language we have here, but then DSA can make a policy decision if they would like to allow people to come in.
We've got Dennis, Sean, then Rob.
I would just like to agree with Sean and also Teresa. I think that this, I don't think we need this provision because DSA has a way of dealing with this right now. And if this goes in, then you may have a case where a district files the structural access and fire and life safety on one day and just forgets to file the high performance and comes in the next day, and this says it won't be accepted. So I think that if DSA has a way of dealing with it sometime during the checking process, let DSA deal with it.
Sean?
I say ditto to what Dennis just said. And my main worry is that I'll have DSA plans dated one day, and then I'll have my high performance review with a later date, and the regulations would say that OPSC should not accept it. So I appreciate that everybody's on the same page about what we want to happen. I don't think these regulations are in line with that.
Rob?
And just to agree with Sean and Dennis, if the reg were to move forward as worded, although DSA, and we've heard that now a couple times, has the ability to make it work, the use of the word must, and Bill said should twice, must will preclude OPSC from allowing the project to be considered for HPI. And so I know everyone's intent, but But I would have to agree with Sean. Why even revise that section of the regs?
Kathy,
Actually,
Teresa?
I have a comment. It should say should, at least, to remind them that we would prefer to
Right.
see them all at once, rather than have to deal with it after the fact, and also have unhappy customers who said, you didn't tell us that we needed to do them all at once, and then when they do have structural changes because of something that they're doing with their high performance, that they're unhappy campers. So if we could at least put the reminder in.
Are we okay to make it to should, which
Should instead of
allows?
must, yeah.
So are we in consensus with removing the word must and adding the word should? Fred?
If it should, is that regulation? Is that a suggestion? And is, we really hope you do, you should, you kind of sort of might want to? I mean, is it redundant or unnecessary? And under policy?
You deal.
And what, yes, I deal with OAL. I've tried that. But that was in a different time, different years ago on different topics. But oftentimes it will say if it says should, that's not a regulation. That's a suggestion. And you need to deal with that outside the regulatory structure. But, you know, they may, who knows? They may.
Well, do we have, hold on, Patty. So if taking a step back, we all agree to the language should. We'd be okay if we submitted that to OAL and OAL says, suggestion, take it out, and then DSA and OPSC can write a policy to address that, because it's not that we're doing anything wrong, but are we okay at least submitting it? And then if OAL kicks it out, which I'm looking more to Kathy and DSA if they are okay, and then we just create a policy that would address that so that districts are then very clear. And then Patty, do you have anything on this?
Thank you, Patty Herrera with Cash. I would just really go back to Sean's initial statement that this is really a DSA processing issue. It's not related to SFP funding eligibility for the project. And DSA has many mechanisms to address processing deficiencies. So I would suggest that the better place for this would be under the jurisdiction of DSA in a clarifying policy, or I don't know if you guys have an HPI bulletin, if it's an HPI IR, or if it's an HPI policy, but you know, you have those, and I would suggest that if this is a problem with DSA processing, that it be addressed in those more flexible mechanisms under the jurisdiction of DSA and not in regulation that determines funding for a project.
Okay, so unanimous consent to take it out. Mamie, you're
Wait,
done
that
for
was
the
the
day.
whole
You
rant.
don't need to say anything. Tien?
Regarding the funding aspect, doesn't matter it's a new application or reimbursement, OPSC always rely on the DSA approval. So I think that's a very good enforcement on that policy here on the regulation. So.
Okay. So we're removing it then?
Mavon?
Removing the change?
So you, okay, because I was just going to say, well, a couple things, but the word should is very ambiguous, and you don't want to deal with that in the future. Okay, the other thing is, I'm not sure I'm following this whole discussion, but if the goal is the goal or part of the goal, and if it is this, I agree with it, that we do not want to allow projects that are already either on the funded approval list or a portion to be able to come back in and say, now I want to get money for HPI. Those components were actually already there. I just now want to get the money for them. That wouldn't be a goal that I shouldn't say. I think that would be of concern, because we're trying to incentivize and not go back and refund districts that are already doing something. So So if that's the goal of this, I think that's a good goal, and I don't know if that's addressed somewhere else in this, if it's not addressed here.
Rob?
So as I understand Bill's point, and again, I agree with it, is it could technically be a new construction project that you haven't occupied yet either, but you can have a district who has a CHIPS resolution. They're naturally just building things that qualify for all these points. They've already gone to DSA for approval. They're in the middle of construction, have not submitted to OPSC yet, so they haven't received any apportionment, preliminary or otherwise. And now they're submitting to OPSC and saying that I had to request HPI at the time I asked for structural, fire, life safety, and access. I can't ask for HPI now because I didn't do that.
Okay.
So these are projects that haven't even been to OPSC yet,
Okay.
but that are under construction.
Can I ask if that other issue is addressed somewhere in here? Because I would think someone would lose their place in line for an apportionment or an unfunded approval if they want to come back in for this funding. And
That's what's happened, and what we were trying to avoid is that people were actually coming in afterwards and then thinking, oh, wait, I'm losing my place in line. We're sitting there with a set of plans, and then they put us on hold, and
But
we
I
have
want
to
them
get
to
back to
lose
it.
their
So there's a
place.
lot of...
Right.
Yes, you do. Because then they're I
want them to lose their. I mean, I personally want them.
Yes, you do, because you want them to come back and get the HPI.
No,
if they do.
no. Actually, what I'm saying is, I think it's appropriate that someone who's already in line and now finds out there's this new program that could get them some extra funding, that they lose their place in line in order to tap into this. And that's what I'm just asking, if that's addressed anywhere in the regs.
Sean the Mamie?
OPSC's current process would cause a district to lose its place in line if they attempted to do that.
And Mamie?
Yeah, I just wanted clarification on which line, whether it was the DSA line or the OPSC line.
OPSC unfunded list. If they have already approved, which is full and final, the only way to handle that per statute and regulation is to have them jump back off, get that, because we cannot adjust them once the board is approved full and final. They have to come off.
Right, and I would agree with Sean that that's covered, but I would think the DSA line is also covered from the standpoint of how DSA normally handles things that are put in, pulled out, put in, pulled out. But as we discussed previously, you're moving through the process.
So just to kind of, because I think we did have consensus to take this language out on page 9 and have it come out on page 10, and that in working with this, since you guys are experts, that if you have suggestions, give and clarify the process with Teresa and Kathy and Lydia to make sure that it's fairly understood. Yes.
Just to verify, the wording will go back to the way it was. Is that correct? Because I think the intent of this whole thing is that people have to come through us for plan verification.
Yeah. So, take out, sorry. Thank you for clarifying what I
We're not going
meant.
to strike that section. We're going to
Yes,
put it back
yes,
there.
the underlined language is going away. We're going back to the original.
The stricken language is coming back.
Yes, and the strikeout is going back in. So we're going back to how we originally had it.
That's fine. We'll do
All right. Yes, Dennis?
I just have one minor point of clarification in the write-up having to do with the points. Under enhanced commissioning, the last 2 lines.
What page?
I'm sorry, stamp page 5, I guess it is. I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Under enhanced commissioning, the last 2 lines, you say, whereas standard commissioning includes a commissioning agent being involved only post-construction, and I think that's an error. I think standard commissioning is the agent is involved during the entire process. They just don't do as much as the enhanced commissioning does.
Okay,
so
thank you.
I
That was the
don't think
definition that we were provided, so that's
Yeah.
fine.
I don't think it affects the regs. I looked at it, and I don't think that's in the regs, but I just want
But
to
we
clarify.
want to make sure, because our write-ups would be used in consideration with policy to make sure that they are correct. So thank you for that clarification. Now, the rest of the language. Any other concerns? Well, come on up. So look at the rest of the language, and, well, you give your comment.
on that subject matter, Lisa, I'm sorry to cut in. There is a incorrect statement saying only post-construction on the enhanced commissioning. It should be pre-design to post-design, post-construction. So the word only needs to be changed. Because enhanced commissioning is really enhanced from the very beginning of programming the project all the way to post-construction. So they're involved in all aspects.
Stamp page 5, back to the original.
But Dennis, I was even lost on his, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Because it says enhanced commissioning means having a commissioning agent involved both during design and after construction, whereas standard commissioning includes a commissioning agent being involved only post-construction.
I think
It's not post-construction.
we're just trying to clarify what actually happens. The work of the commissioning agent does not happen post-construction. It happens at the end of the construction phase when they do pre-functional and functional testing and then interaction. So it's just the word post. It's actually during construction.
But this sentence was clarifying between enhanced commissioning
No, I
and
agree.
standard
Yes.
commissioning.
It's just confusing. I think it needs to be.
So it should say both during
you explain
design
that?
and construction, whereas standard commissioning includes a commissioning agent being involved only during construction.
Only during.
During
I don't think that's
construction,
correct.
It's incorrect,
It's the
too.
post.
That's not correct either.
And
I think we need
okay.
to go.
Could you explain?
Teresa had the clarification, so Teresa?
Yeah, we have the book in front of us here, and the only things that are not checked, because there's design intent, there's design specifications, review, testing, report.
Short version, how do we correct the sentence in the item?
Yeah. So how should this, how should it be written?
Well, I'm not a writer like that. but
Well, okay,
The two
so
things
wait,
that
wait,
are
wait.
the two things in standard that are not in enhanced is design development, design review, and submittal review. Those are the only two things that aren't in standard.
Here's how we resolve it. Teresa, you work with Brian. Brian will redraft it, and it'll be presented at our working group so that it's given correctly to the board with the write-up.
Okay.
Give them the language. Yes, Dennis.
I think the simple way to solve it is just take out the definition of enhanced and standard. Leave it back to the CHIPS, or leave it as it is in the CHIPS guidelines as a reference, and just take out that
The entire last sentence.
explanation. Yeah.
Fine.
Because it's so specific. Too many check marks.
Thank you.
See? Well,
Thank you. Wael Alatar from San Bernardino City Unified School District. Want to make one clarification here that projects on the unfunded list are not full and final. So, and that actually brings to my point here is that there are, in the stamp page 10, it says for those projects accepted by DSA prior to October 1st, 2007. There are projects on the unfunded list or the workload with OPSC that do meet those criteria. So my question is how these projects will be addressed in that scope. They already been submitted to OPSC for review.
I'm not sure I understand the
Can I?
question.
okay, Sean?
My understanding of OPSC's current practice is if you change your grant request, you have to withdraw and resubmit. So trying to increase the high performance grant, I think would trigger a change in the grant request, and you'd have to withdraw and resubmit.
And that's when I bring it to your attention here. In essence, we are penalizing these projects that actually do meet the criteria, and there will not be actually a portion till this regulation will take place. We're actually penalizing these projects for not receiving the funds due.
Which I completely understand, but I made sure that I got clarification on this because it is in regulation and it is in statute. And unfortunately, as much as we're going to want to expedite this and get this into place, it would create a whole new policy and program and violate the law of full and final, that when you are on the unfunded list, when money comes around, that is the money you're going to get as full and final. And unfortunately, we don't want to penalize those with HPI, but if they're willing to step out of the list, out of the unfunded line and go back to DSA, we will happily get them more money, but we cannot keep them on the unfunded list and give them more money because that is per statute full and final.
So let's take the unfunded list, the project on the unfunded list aside, but how about the projects that are right now on the workload? They are not on the unfunded list at this point.
Correct. They can pop back out into DSA.
they do meet the criteria. They already have high performance. They've already been submitted to OPSC with the high performance component in it.
But with these enhanced points, they have to go back, and we do need DSA verification for those points to get more money. Am I correct, Teresa? As if we adopt these and they go into effect and they're already at OPSC, they would still have to come back through DSA. We can do maybe a potential expedited re-review, but to get those points, the extra points with more money, they would still need recertification.
I believe that most of these points here we're talking about are given to these projects. There is not actually a review. These points that we're talking about here are added points that are actually, they're not going to be any specific review in order to add these points. So
there is going to have to be a specific review by DSA to verify that the additional points are being added.
So, I mean, and that's maybe a policy discussion of how can we expedite that if they are at OPSC and the regulations go into place, knowing that at least with the prerequisites, if they meet the prerequisites, how to come back for a quick stamp and go back into OPSC. But I think that is a policy discussion, and it's something I think that I know the board would like if we could expedite and do something. And as we've now formed a tighter and better working relationship with OPSC and DSA of specifically how do we make that happen and do the least amount of harm with the district so they can pop out and pop back in if they're only on the workload list. Teresa?
Just to clarify, he's talking about those that are in the pipeline then?
Yeah.
And we've had this problem before, and it would be nice to have some kind of date cutoff included if we can. We've done that before. I think it was in the beginning portions.
Mm-hmm.
However, and I think this has to do with the fact that we're moving to a 2009 versus 2006. So there's some points there. But also what happens with the starter grant? What are you going to do with that? Are people going to come back through us for that? I mean, that might be something we want to talk about.
I just need to finish here and say that this is actually something within your ability to recommend and make that regulation to take these projects in consideration, especially the ones that are on the workload. They have not been even approved by the State Allocation Board for the unfunded list.
Well, and we'll go Tien, then Dennis, but one of the things I want to provide caution with is with regulation, we set, like we just had a certain standard, and with policy and discussion, I think it may be, with communication getting out to districts, how we would handle this, that I would hate to set up a standard via regulation that doesn't allow for any flexibility in something like this. So, Tien, then Dennis.
For the project that you already submit to us, haven't presented to the board, and we also talk about the scope change, and that probably can also qualify some of that as a scope change to be dealt with it, that we discussed at the IMP before. But Brian, you have...
Well, we have regulations that specifically state if you alter your request that you have to get out of line and come back.
Yes.
I don't really know how we can...
We are not altering our request. We're submitting we already submitted for the high performance status. It's just you are at the process. You are actually increasing the number of points that you're giving for these projects.
Okay. Dennis?
I think this goes back to the history of where how new regulations apply to applications, and at what point in the process the regulations apply to those. And I'm not sure, but I think it's anything that hasn't been approved by the SAB, a new regulation will apply to that. Therefore, if this becomes regulations, then those in the pipeline that have HPI applications should be adjusted. Mm-hmm. I think that's what the history of regulations.
Okay, Brian, then Tim, or Tim.
Our regulations also state that you'll be subject to the regulations in effect at the time of submittal of the application. So if we do have new regulations that come into effect, you have to get out of line and come back so that you are subject to those new criteria.
Tim?
And I was just going to read that reg line to clarify. It says that, right, a funding application with the exception of funding applications identified in another section Submitted to the OPSC that has not received an approval will receive funding under the provisions of the regulations that were in effect when the application was submitted to the OPSC, and so on.
So they'd still have to step out of line, but I think here's the policy with this, especially with HPI and how important it is to the board of figuring out between OPSC and HPI how we do an expedited. So they get kind of, if they're already in line, the regs go into place to get them more points, just the quick pop out, pop back in. How can we make that? How can we do the new DSA, less than 4 weeks, pop in, pop out?
You won't have a problem with DSA because you don't have to go back and wait in line for the structural fire, life, safety, and access review. You're asking for our staff, who have already reviewed your HPI components, to just do a quick recalculation of the points that you get under the plan they've already reviewed. So there's no reason we can't do that very expeditiously.
So I think then writing a comment, well, I'm going to cut you off. We know where your position is. Thank you. Thank you. Sean?
I've done that with OPSC before. We send a letter saying we withdraw our application, and it also says we resubmit, and our project managers just move forward with the review. So
I think
it's worked for us.
Policy-wise, because we've discussed it here, and DSA has put on Test Me Online, on video that they're going to do this. So I think we did. Kathy, you've committed.
We can do it. We're here to help.
So I think just if putting it when these regs go into place, kind of putting in the process in a bulletin to make sure that districts know if they're in the workload, or kind of hold off if that's the case, how to handle that. So is that acceptable? Mamie?
It's acceptable to me. I would just like to emphasize, though, that there's some responsibility on the part of the districts to make sure that they're not tweaking the project in all sorts of different ways and then try to fit it underneath these provisions. That we need to make sure that we've got, as Whale was trying to describe, we've got our HPI provisions in there, and they're just being recalced.
Okay, so any other comments on the regulations as we've drafted and amended them? Oh, Patty, come on up.
I'm short, sorry.
Thank you. Patty Herrera again with Cash. Just a couple of comments, and I understand that there's still the legal question about the match, no match.
We're not, yeah.
Moving forward with regulations being presented to the board, I would suggest or ask the committee to consider actually amending the existing proposed regulations to state that the $250,000 incentive grant is not required for a local match, and then that's something that the board can just strike out of the regulation depending on what that legal opinion determines. The other thing, and maybe I'm jumping the gun here, Lisa, and don't admonish me publicly, is I'd really like the committee to consider a provision that actually was in the cash chips.
I'm stopping you now. You can come back when we finish financial hardship and
no,
and
that's well, I was going there.
Third party financial.
No. I was
Data?
going to financial. The
Financial. Okay, but first we got to finish the language before we pop into board direction. So you get to go sit down and come back up when we actually go there.
She didn't listen to me. Okay.
There would be chaos. So any other comments, public testimony, come on up. If it's as the regulations as they exist, proposed for changes, you want any changes before we move to financial hardship and data? And third party and sliding scale and DSA.
Yes, Patty Ashton with School Advisors. Just wondering on when you have to, if we were to withdraw a project from the current workload and then come back in for the new regulations, how that would affect org projects that are currently in this org funding cycle. Would the regulations be in effect by the next org funding cycle?
All depends. Don't know. So. It depends on OAL and getting it into them and how quickly they can turn it out, but it's generally a 3 to 4 month timeline turnaround. And
are they suggesting these as emergency regulations that they might meet this next org funding cycle?
We had our reg gal check into this, who's done this for years, and it has not, that we've kind of gotten the indication that these would not qualify as emergency priority in funding and getting money out earlier, yes, but that these didn't quite meet. I can have her double check again, but for the next org in July, the deadline, these will not be in effect.
And future org is still unknown?
Future org is still open to board direction as to a date if that money is not taken out and put in another program or pot via legislation. So any other comments on the language as proposed and amended? Hello.
Hello, good morning. Alice Sung with Green Bank Associates, Oakland Unified's High Performance Schools Manager and General Green Schools Architect. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I apologize also for coming in late, so you may have already addressed this. But
quite all right.
Quick question. Does the 250 starter grant also apply to those projects that were using the 2006 criteria? Because I don't see it here in the regs. There are only 8 projects in the modernization pipeline right now that were under 2006.
Not in there.
I think it's just 2000.
That was one of our questions when we.
I think it was meant for 2009 going forward, because unless they pop out, because if they're in, well, if you pop back out, you're also subjecting yourself to 2009. So if you're doing 2006 and in the workload and these regulations get passed and you want the higher money, then now you're subjecting yourself to the 2009 energy code.
It's going to be in effect.
No, that's, well, I guess my impression from the last proposal was that the 250 starter grant would apply to all currently, and let me refer to the language.
Mm-hmm.
If you applied under your DSA application and checked the box 16B for high performance review, and again, there's only 8 of those modernizations that were still using the 2006 criteria in the pipeline. They have not yet been funded.
But
there's no portion.
We
yet.
just had, it's going back to the same conversation of when you submit your application, the regulations that are in effect apply at that time. And so to qualify for the higher, you then come back to DSA, the new regulations in effect would be the 2009 energy, so that then you would have to change your project to then comply with the 2009 energy code. Am I correct? Am I yeah. Get Teresa, Lydia?
Lydia has a comment.
It is our understanding that the high-performance projects are dated on the day they come to DSA, the original DSA date. So if projects that came in starting October 2007, they were rated under the 2006 criteria.
Mm-hmm.
They came prior to that, they were rated under 2002. And our question yesterday was, is there going to be a effective date for the 2009?
The date OAL approves it is the effective date.
Yep.
So projects that come to DSA,
until they come in, until the regulations go into place, they will be under the current energy code.
Keep in mind that the 2009 versus the 2006 has quite a difference. I think it's 8% difference in the energy requirements. So there's quite a that would be a big change on the part of.
I understand, but because this is a regulatory change, we can't arbitrarily say 2009 applies or this wouldn't apply when you go through and then come back in.
We're not trying to make the regulations different, and we're not trying to change the regulated Title 24 energy code that the projects, properly should have been reviewed under. We're trying to change the language in this regulation of the high performance incentive grant funding to include the sentence under section C, last page.
Nope, stamp page at the bottom. What does it say?
5.
I think she's proposing that they keep the old regs and just get the $250,000 grant.
I don't have the stamp. I have mine. Sorry, let me
That's okay.
quickly look at the page.
It's stamp page 11.
Thank you.
It's 11.
So C or D, 3, for those projects accepted by the DSA utilizing the 2009 CHIPS criteria in which the board level blah, 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 board shall provide $250,000. In addition,
so you want to add utilizing 2006 and or 2009?
That could be, or you could add it under the 2006 on the previous stamp page to 2000 or 008 or 7 where you have the 2006 version.
Well, but this is specifically related to the incentive grant, so it
Yes.
would have to be, the proper place would be for those projects accepted by DSA utilizing the 06 or 09, but understanding.
Yes.
But then, this is a huge caveat, and let me say this publicly and on the record. If you are in 06 utilizing that for doing that, and you are already in the workload, and you pop out of line, is that then subjecting them to the 2009 requirements?
No.
No, I would contend
It's
not.
the date of,
Hold on.
The date
Bill?
of, my opinion would be that it's the date of submission to DSA governs the code requirement.
Okay. Dennis?
Just a point of clarification, does DSA, is there a date certain that you're no longer accepting 2006 and accepting 2009?
Until there's a new
Or is it
regulation in
is it-
place. It's based on the effective date of
these regulations don't say anything about
No,
requiring.
they can't, Dennis. They can't. Here's the thing. By law, DSA cannot apply 09 until OAL approves these regs, and then that is the date that DSA then applies 09 going forward.
But there's nothing in these.
I know, you
regs.
can't, because we don't know when OAL is going to approve that date.
I think, can I, unless Dennis, you had
Sounds
something
like
to say?
Endless circle, a catch-22 thing here.
Chicken and the egg.
Yeah.
But, and hold a thought if you had one, and I apologize for interrupting.
Alice, you're taking over.
I'm sorry. I just have to say that I just noticed this, that in my version from the internet last night reading this is slightly different from this version. If you look at page 09, under what is purportedly the volume 2006 version of the regs, item 3, or there's so many A, B, C, Ds, I don't know what section I'm under. Towards the end of the page, it's under the 2006 criteria, and I think it's a typo. It's meant to say 2006 California CHIPS criteria, isn't it? It repeats itself. 2009 CHIPS criteria shall provide.
Number 3?
At the very bottom, the number 3 on page 009 says, for those projects accepted by the DSA utilizing the 2009 California CHIPS criteria, rest of the sentence, shall provide $250,000. Then it's repeated again.
Well, it's the difference between new and modernization. One's new and one's mod.
This is where the mod starts. Before that's new.
Okay, so I stand corrected. So then what I would like to see then in the regs, and I beg your pardon, that sentence in both sections 3, and quite frankly, I don't care
Include
about
the CHIPS 06.
06 be
and
included with the starter grant of 2005. So that would then properly.
Okay. Question to DSA though. Okay, if this is, let's assuming this is just an incentive starter grant. So if they just come in, if they're 06, and they were submitted rightfully, DSA stamped 06, they jump out of line. If they only come in and ask for the starter grant, would then that, if we put that language in 06, which would then subject them only to getting the starter grant and not the other requirements with the 09 and meeting it, is that a possibility? If we put it, hold on, no, you're not allowed. No, let me finish with DSA.
I have an opinion, but I'm not sure I'm in place to say it. But can I say that?
Yeah.
The fact
It's a
is,
caveat, DSA
we've been
caveat
talking
statement.
about this 250 to get other school districts and other people to get going on this. The people that already did it are already incentivized to do it. So that's just my opinion. But I defer to Kathy or OPSC as how they want to handle this.
Well, my letter talks about what I think of the 250 very politely, so I would prefer that it not say that, but it's possible to put it in the regulation and they could get the $250,000 and would not be subject to re-review by DSA because you're not changing anything except giving them additional $250,000.
It's up to, what's the intent of this starter?
I would hope the intent of the committee be not to punish early adapters.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. We'll now go to committee discussion. Bill?
So would it be the case also if, in other words, you're saying that the district would go back in, would they also get new points based on the new?
Well, here, yes, see here, no,
If you're going to
no,
come back for new
no.
points, then we have to do it under the 2009, because now we're going to relook at your application.
We're not asking for new.
Alice, please, you're actually stepping out of line right now. So
Okay.
we've heard your comments, and so now it's up for the implementation committee to discuss and find that if you've got anything new, but otherwise, if it's okay with you, in the nicest way possible, if you can take your seat.
I do have another point. but
Okay.
I'm going to.
Can I
Should
clarify?
I go back and come back up?
Is if it relates to the current regulations and draft. Okay, let's finish the conversation here at the IMP on this one subject, and when we're done with that, then you can make your other comment. Does that sound okay? Okay, Bill.
So could we, is there any way to clarify with OPSC whether there are other projects in line? I'm looking over at Sean, because, I mean, in the past, when we first adopted these regulations back in the day, we did grandfather LA Unified in because they had a whole bunch of projects in, as I recall. Right, Lyle? But I'm just wondering if we're, she's here asking on behalf of Oakland Unified School District, are there other projects in the similar situation, and what would the impact be on the funds?
DSA?
No, OPSC.
Or OPSC?
Well, any project, like if we were to move forward with this idea, a project that had, let's say, already received its apportionment, maybe it's in this last batch or something. Is that what we're talking about?
No, we're talking about those that are not on the unfunded list, but on the workload list.
Oh.
So, and that's why I suggested, because Bill, I think I have an answer for you, which I think would be in line for what the SAB intended with the starter grant, and that's why I suggested only in 3 that we could add in DSA utilizing the 06 or 09, which then for those with the 06 or already in the workload list, they could only get the starter grant. If they wanted more money, then that subjects them, when these regulations go into place to get the prereqs, it subjects them to the 09 energy code and all the other requirements that go with it. But if we just include it here, then it's just they get the starter grant on top of what they've already been apportioned with the HBI, because it's the prerequisites and the points and everything else were made based on the 09 energy code, and that's why the prerequisites and everything else came into place. And there's a very clear line of it's the regulations in place at that time, and if you're jumping back and coming back in, the regulations in place at this time are the 09 whatnot. But if it's an incentive grant non-match, that's just the one way of saying you're popping back in just the 06, the incentive grant. And I know, Alice, you disagree. I know it's registered. It's registered. But Kathy, then Sean.
I think you could do what you just described if you wrote it in the regulation that way. But you run into the issue of they're on the workload list, they lose their place in line at least, and they could then be eligible for the 250, but now they've got to get in at the back end of the workload list.
And that's something, Sean?
And we're probably not going to do that because most of ours are new construction, and we would have to get new appraisals, and our land value has decreased in the time that it would take to do this. So we'd lose money on a deal like that.
And bond authority.
We're not going to jump out of line to try to get the starter grant. I don't know about anybody else, but you don't have to worry about us.
So, but it is something of what does the rest of the committee feel about this? Bill, you're giving me dirty looks.
We have 3 projects at least, I think, that are in this situation. 4. Someone's telling me 4.
Mm-hmm.
But I have kind of mixed feelings from a policy standpoint. But
policy as it should or should not be added?
From a should not be added standpoint. Just, in other words, we partly are, and this is going to go back to last time's discussion, we're partly justifying, and the rationale for the starter grant, one of the rationales for the starter grant was that we are now operating under an increased level of standard, a 2008 energy code and a 2009 chip standard, and that's all. I'll just leave it at that.
So you're registering objection to adding in 06 and 09 for the starter grant. Well, how does the rest of the committee feel about that?
I object also.
DSA objects? Mamie?
I'm not aligning with Kathy under the objection category, but more with Bill under the rationalization of policy discussion. no matter what you do, there's always a cutoff. There's always going to be some winners and losers. And I use the word losers loosely. I would agree. I would agree with the. Yeah, exactly. I would agree with the speaker from the standpoint it's a whole different philosophy that is not part of this discussion, and that is those who have gone on their own, who didn't need incentivization, and they're doing this, shouldn't they reap some of the benefits of doing that? But that's a different discussion. It's not part of this discussion, and it's always out there as well.
So removing and going back to the original intent of this program was to incentivize those who are not coming in. So if we're to incentivize those not coming in, which means we would leave the language as is.
And it's a higher level of performance that you have to get to, which is why you're being incentivized.
Okay. Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I want to just try and understand. So if we were to add an exception for an existing project with 2006 CHIPS criteria, we'd have to, from a practical standpoint, the district would remove their application from the workload list, resubmit to DSA for the HPI starter grant. That's the way it would be, I assume, written, and then we would get back in line. But we couldn't even do that until A, the regulations were adopted by the board, and B, the regulations were approved by OAL. And in the meantime, the workload train is presumably still leaving the station, right?
Correct.
And so
Correct.
we don't know what from a practical standpoint, it's possible that it would be a moot point for several of my projects if OPSC could step it up a little bit. No, I'm just kidding. But, so I'm not sure how to play this one, but I have a concern from a policy standpoint. As a practical matter, from our district standpoint and from Oakland's, it would be a good thing. So I'm torn, and I'm a Librist.
And as we are the implementation committee to discuss and implement what the board wants and make sure that we are implementing the policy and the intent, this was never discussed before. It can be in my notes to the board for consideration, but at this time, is it the board's will to leave the language as is? Yeah, Sean?
We're not going to pull anything out. It would cost me or LA a lot of money to try to get $250,000. I suspect everybody's in that same boat, especially since most of these are new construction. I don't think adding this language is going to drain the pot. I don't have that concern. So I'm kind of, if you're torn, help them out.
Well, here's the thing. It's we can add the language, and then it's up to the district if they want to spend their extra time and money to do this. Although I do understand where you're coming from, Bill, with this discussion of the higher level of 09, and they didn't need the incentive to come in, and so are we actually setting bad policy? I know no skin off our back, but let's talk policy. I understand, sometimes politics trump policy, but if we're here to discuss policy, was this envisioned as part of what we were trying to do with changing the regs? Kathy?
I'm also concerned, I'll stop with the objection and be more serious, that we are setting the policy or setting the precedent when we have this type of discussion, that for everything that we do, a lot of what we do is work in progress, and how do you account for that? And if you make an exception for this, you're going to make it really hard as you move forward to make sure that there's not some clear demarcation of when a program should become effective and when it isn't. And the potential for creating a whole lot of rework when you're interested in OPSC and DSA working effectively and efficiently, and asking us to review those projects again because we've decided to allow them to use a new set of regulations. It's a lot of rework on our part, and how quickly you'll forget that when you're saying what's taking you so long to get those things moving.
Okay, so IMP. Shall we leave it as is, and I can include the suggestion in my notes because it is a policy change for the board to take into consideration?
I know I agree with Kathy. I think that the intent of all of this was to provide an incentive for districts to become involved in the program, not to go back and make everybody else whole that has been there and has started it. So I think we ought to leave it.
Okay. Mamie, or I'm going to close this one part of the discussion and allow Alice to hit her second point.
I just wanted to say it's an incentive, it's not a stipend, so we need to leave it alone.
Okay.
But I would like to reiterate that I think this is a healthy discussion for this group to have, because that's what we're charged with, is bringing out these little points and how does it fit in the bigger picture.
And I think this has actually been a great discussion to have. Okay, I want to close this. Do you have anything relevant that would change the IMP's direction on this one item?
I don't know.
Okay, done.
I would just like to point out Alice's point before. People that did have their own incentives for getting into this program and were ahead of the game shouldn't be penalized because
understood. And
No,
this is not this understood. But here's the thing: we created the HPI assuming that it would bring people in. We've seen that it hasn't, so we're not penalizing. We're changing it for and getting those the next step. Because here's, I can say, I get it, but, Natomas Unified, where I'm a district, we didn't care whether there was HPI or not. We made the decision. We're not going to come back and get this money because we as a board decided this is the right thing to do. So, Bill?
I guess I would just, at the very least, like you to put it in your notes and to the board and express that we had the discussion
And that's absolutely with my IMP notes. This will be included with that. So, Alice, I know it's not what you wanted to hear. So, your second point that you had, because we're not going to have this discussion on this point.
Thank you. The second point is that if going forth, the awarding of points for the prerequisites, the 9 additional points for prereqs, if you effectively give those 9 points, then I would contend you should consider raising the threshold of when those starter grants do apply, and leaving them at 27 for new construction and 20 respectively for modernization is effectively reducing the threshold if there's those 9 automatic which were formerly prerequisites for which no points were given. It effectively lowers the standard of what constitutes a high-performance school in my mind, and also sort of relaxes the incentivization for people to actually achieve higher performance, higher true performance by gaining in the 50s and in the 60s, point-wise.
Okay.
So I would suggest you consider raising the threshold if you're going to leave the 9 prerequisite points in to account for that. Presumably 29 and 30, can't even do the math now, I'm so.
Okay. We'll have OPSC, then DSA.
Actually, go ahead.
Teresa?
I think she has a good point. And the fact that those are prerequisites, that wasn't the intent to have the other credits be lessened, reduced. So the intent was that the prerequisites would get more money, and that's all. That was our intent when we recommended it. So I think the thresholds need to be raised.
Correct me if I'm wrong, though. We had this discussion last month, and we agreed to leave the thresholds the same because the rationalization was with adopting the 2009 CHIPS criteria, which is higher, and the energy code, which increases the 8% requirement, that in effect, the increased cost is being offset by allowing the prerequisites. Am I correct in that summarization? So I will.
Does that include the 2 extra we did for acoustics?
It didn't.
Can I?
Just
Yes.
asking.
Yeah.
I think the 2, and Brian can correct me or whoever. We got into the whole let's get rid of acoustics as a prereq. And in Brian's presentation, when we began this conversation today, it was we're not getting rid of acoustics as a prereq, but we added 2 points to it.
Mm-hmm. Because of the cost of which, Deborah, thank you, and many others
Very
brought up of how costly it is with modernization. So, Alice, your suggestion will be reflected in the notes. It will also be reflected that the board had a discussion and decided that the base standard points would remain the same. It is for the board's discretion if they choose to change it, but there was consensus for the most part. I know I'll speak for Chris. He objected I know Chris, I don't know where you are, but I'll speak on behalf of Department of Finance, did register an objection to that and thought that he agreed with you, Alice, that the points should be raised. But at this point, we've had that discussion, and so we can move on to the next.
Okay, thank you. I have a third point.
Yep.
Actually, can I ask for clarification on the first point? We reflect in the notes, which is what I thought I heard Bill say, the suggestion of the 06 being included?
That will be reflected in my notes as to summarizing what was discussed at the implementation committee meeting.
And it was my intent to see that the regulations maybe could be, since we've separated new construction and modernization, it may be more palatable to the board to consider that only for the modernization projects, for which there are only 8 or a dozen in the pipeline.
I know you're trying. I know.
Thank you.
I know.
Thank you. The third point is that was there consideration for California CHIPS criteria 2009 for each of the new criteria? You again mentioned only the 5 categories, and there are 2 completely new categories: leadership, education, innovation as a whole category. And I know policy was also discussed, that it would be a good thing to have the districts make a resolution. That's in that category. And the second category is climate action. And I don't see those in the regs mentioned at all. And third point of that, which is minor, underneath the energy section, natural ventilation, as is in the new 2009 CHIPS criteria, is 3 points for AC avoidance. And I would contend that that is actually the highest climate action any school can make. And second, it has an additional 4th point. So I would like to move to see that natural ventilation point credit be 1 to 4 points, as is in the CHIPS criteria. And I have that if anyone wants to read the documentation.
If you can make sure that Brian has that. Teresa, you had comment, then Bill?
I'll lose my place, but I remember the first 2. Basically, climate action was included in the renewables, as I understand it, right, Lydia? Yes. And as far as the leadership and innovation credits, those are not considered bricks and mortar, and I believe that was decided that would not be included.
Okay.
And OPSC, and I think Kathy has some history on that.
Even though innovation could be bricks or mortar?
If it's a DSA standard not included, I think that was the kind of basis.
I'd have to say the innovation credit's similar to what you're saying in LEAD, where you can just make up stuff and we would evaluate it. Is that what you're saying for the innovation? I'm not familiar with that part.
Innovation grants have a broad definition and are individual to each particular project as they're brought up, but they can be bricks and mortar. For example, paying for a kiosk that is built into the front of the lobby that actually shows the monitoring of your photovoltaic system for the renewable energy. What good is it to have renewable energy?
That was one of the items that we had that wasn't considered. It's bricks and mortar because you're building it, but it's not part of the structural building, the facility that you're building.
Yeah. I'd have to say it would slow down a review because we'd have to look into it a lot heavier, and that's, I think, one issue. And secondly, we think that's a great idea, but maybe the $250,000 can cover that. That's just commentary.
So, Tim, and then Alice, one of the things is if you can make sure I have the documentation, it'll be included in my notes. So, Tim?
I just wanted to clarify something that Alice brought up about the 2009 CHIPS having 2 completely new categories. It's not exactly 2 brand new categories that are completely new credits.
One is modified and one is
They took the 5 and they expanded it to 7 and kind of moved some of them around within or among the categories. So we went through all of the credits offered in all 7 categories and looked at that. We didn't think there was any good reason to shuffle up the organization of the regs and have 7 categories in our regs. We had a pretty good foundation. We just updated to include more points or more credits, but we were aware of all the new credits that were in those 7 categories.
Okay, thank you. Bill?
I just want to, especially as a school district that benefits from natural cooling in the Bay Area, I do want to agree that natural ventilation, we might want to reconsider that natural ventilation. In other words, so in our district, on the bay side of our district, we have two sides of the district we wrap around the horn around Richmond. And on the inner part, a district standard is to always input air conditioning in because it's so hot and the fog doesn't get into there. On the bay side, we don't use air conditioning at all. And so we use all natural ventilation, and that's a major savings for our energy use and overall electrical use and gas use, that kind of thing. So I think it would be good for us to reflect natural ventilation as a really key component, so I'm agreeing with Alice on that one.
Mary?
Well, lucky you. You want money for not doing something?
It's not actually not doing something. May I speak?
That's called avoidance.
Wait. Somebody else called Bill out besides me? Yes, Alice?
Madam Chairman, may I answer that? It's actually not building, it's in addition to not putting on a rooftop package unit that has, and we can very efficiently use up a whole lot of energy, let me tell you folks. But what it is actually paying for what a district has to do to actually make sure the ventilation meets the requirements of ASHRAE and providing proper ventilation in a natural ventilation manner that meets the code, that meets DSA requirements, actually considers a lot of construction. You need you need some mechanical assistance, which is allowed in the creds, in the credits, and you need special operable windows. You need to make sure that you've got enough insulation. You need to make sure
Alice,
that you've
I appreciate it, but I got to move this along. And here's where this can have a discussion at the HPI, because this is something new, and we're not here necessarily to consider something new. We're here to consider and implement the regulations that the SAB approved, and this was not discussed beforehand, so it's appropriate at when we consider our HPI working group to finalize everything. So in the meantime, Alice, you need to get me this information so that I can give it to the working group and the other IMP members, but we have to move on, and if it doesn't relate to what the language and how it is drafted right now, I know, but it wasn't considered before, and it wasn't board direction to look at ventilation, so I'm stopping this. It'll go to HPI. We've got to move on to the next. If it's not in this language and the board did not give me direction, we are not discussing it at this precise moment, but it's added on the to-do list for the HPI working group when we can figure that out.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson.
Thank you.
So the next is the next point in the process to move to an HPI meeting before
the
SAB.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bill? And then we're going to take a potty break.
Bill Orr, the Executive Director of CHIPS. I'm anxious to move on to the third-party discussion, but just for clarity and consistency, I would request that when the different versions of the CHIPS criteria are referenced, that they're all done in the same fashion. So the new changes that we're proposing are referencing the 2009 California CHIPS criteria, and I would just ask that you change the other references to refer to the 2002 California CHIPS criteria and the 2006 California CHIPS criteria.
For consistency, so
Yes.
take out where it says just above, like on stamp page 9, for example, where it says CHIPS Best Practice Manual Volume 3, 2006 edition.
Yeah.
It should read 2006 CA CHIPS criteria.
Yes.
Is that, can we do that? Make sense? Teresa, any object? Lydia, we're okay with that? Okay, so are there any other comments based on the existing language? So I'm going to close the door on the existing language. We're going to take a little 10-minute potty break, and then we'll come back and discuss financial hardship, how to include data, and that fun stuff. So it is 10:25. We're going to come back. Oh wait, it's 11. I can't read. It's 11:25, so we're back at 11:35.
When's lunch? Oh, yeah.
And the plan is going to be that it's a little past 11:30, so we're going to go till 12:30. We're going to have lunch and immediately start at 1:30. For those that have to leave earlier than 3:30, you can, but we do have this room until 4:30. So if we need to take a little extra time to make sure we do it right, we will do so. I would like to finish up HPI when we have seismic. Seismic, make sure you look at the write-up under discussion. It has 2 points, bullet points of discussion of what we want to get to today. So think about that at lunch. And if you have any comments in regards to CTE, think about that at lunch so that we can move through those items fairly succinctly at the end of the day. But I do want to make sure that everybody has that in mind. So to reiterate what the plan is now, we are now going to discuss board direction, which was to discuss financial hardship and how we include those in the regs, and then how we draft and make sure that we can collect data. And then after we have those discussions, then we will move to other items that were not specific in board direction, i.e. third-party verification, sliding scale, and what's in the DSA letter. Sound good? All right. So OPSC, do you have suggestions in regards to financial hardship and handling that? Brian?
Not particularly. We had talked about possibly some of the ideas that were thrown out there were some kind of a certification when they come in for their design funds, about adding on a percentage or some kind of an increase to the design costs that are already in regulation for specifically for high performance. Actually, I think that was kind of the general idea that we had discussed previously in the work group meetings. We were trying to see if that was a good idea, if everybody liked that idea, or if maybe they have other suggestions as to what we could consider.
So to clarify, it would be that if you come in your financial hardship, you in regs get 20% for design. Would we consider that if you're coming in and you check the box that I'm going to do HPI, you get 25% of the project cost, or a certain amount of money, the $100,000 in the incentive, or
right, something to that effect, yeah.
Deborah?
Why wouldn't you get the total incentive?
I
Because
don't
you're
know.
financial hardship?
I'm not making any kind of suggestion. I'm just saying this is what
And you're
we were
already
talking
poor,
about.
so why would you cut their money in half?
I mean, if that's the suggestion with financial hardship, if you check, you get the incentive grant up front. Rob?
So, Claire, do we have any financial hardship projects that have submitted under HPI?
No, you can't afford it.
I want to hear that from OPSC.
I'll tell you.
Or
I know the
DSA.
Sorry, I missed your question. What?
Have there been any financial hardship projects submitted under HPI?
I think we've had at least one COE. So I guess the answer would be yes.
One.
No?
Maybe one.
I'd have to verify, but I think maybe only one.
Is it still in process?
We're waiting because of some hardship.
It's been in process. We still have it in plan check for 2 years.
Okay, so it's been submitted to DSA, but it hasn't. Then therefore, it hasn't come to OPSC yet.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, none come to mind.
Yeah, so it's in there.
So what is the will of committee with financial hardship?
Let me
Mark.
say one more thing. I think the one concern we have is if we were to give a portion of the incentive grant and not coming from somewhere else. If that, you're basically, we can't make you certify that you're going to meet the minimum thresholds of the program requirements. So I think the one concern from our point of view would be, that you say we're going to do high performance, and then somewhere in the design you decide you don't want to do that. I think that's where our concern would lie as far as, portioning funds out of the incentive grant portion. But
We'll take public comment after, so keep your hands down.
wow.
Yeah, Dennis?
Well, I think in providing the incentives, there is some analysis that has to be done for districts just to get to the point where they can decide whether to go with HPI or not, or whether it's feasible to go. And maybe a portion of that 250 could be given for that initial analysis, and not, if they decide that they can't, it's not feasible to go ahead with the HPI, then that's forgiven. But if they spend more than that, then it has to come out of their grant, something like that.
Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, with financial hardships, they can come in and they get design apportionment, then they have to come back and then they get their full.
That's right. They get the remainder, the balance of the.
So I think what's appropriate with financial is one, you got to see if it's feasible, you can do it, and I like Dennis's suggestion of what is maybe a small, upfront grant, that if you do go through, it comes out of the total, but if it doesn't, you're not held, it's not held against you if you decide not to move forward because it's not feasible. So what is the appropriate amount? Then what the discussion needs to be is what is the appropriate amount of that design? And you're not getting 250.
Maybe we could talk about an additional percentage increase.
Well, I mean, design, you get 20%, so would you get 20% of 250? I mean, you already get 20% of the total cost for design. Would you get 20% of the 250?
50,000. Okay.
What is 20% of 250?
50,000.
And so that would only be apportioned at design, which then we would have to look at with financial hardship with the applications. Are there changes that we'd have to make to the applications, like a check of the box? We're going to do HPI, so that automatically gets a bump of a $50,000.
I think it probably would, and also it would require reg changes in the financial hardship area of our regulations. So more reg changes for sure.
And it's going to be ready for the board to adopt?
Oh, it's a few words. It's not a big.
So when we decide when we can meet for HPI, you'd be able to have this and bring this forward. Deborah?
Well, at our last meeting, I don't remember the discussion going in this direction that they would only get a portion of the incentive because they were financial hardship.
No. It's a portion only during the design, and then if they come forward and they meet it, then they would get everything else. So this is just the upfront design.
It's like the design grant for construction costs. Yeah, it's just, but it's
good.
Yeah, Lee?
Is there any way in the, and I'm not a financial hardship district, so I don't know, but after they've gotten the design apportionment, you're saying they would get the 20% of 250.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way in between, they don't have to wait for the construction apportionment, but somewhere in between, if they are going forward with design with HP, they can get the rest of that 250 up front, more up front than the construction, because they are using it for planning.
Yeah, but we'd need DSA verification. There has to be some accountability
I'm
built
just asking
into
the
that.
Question: would there be a place? I know it seems like it would be another step, but to make them wait till construction, a lot of that $250,000 is going to be spent on upfront costs, and they don't have any money to do it. So it seems like to really incentivize, and we have nobody in the pipeline doing that except for one project. I don't know whether there's a place, you know what I'm saying? Not so as far down the road as construction.
Mm-hmm. Teresa, any suggestions? Brian?
I was going to ask, I'm wondering, is there anyone who can maybe chime in on about how much of the upfront costs of the 250 would be used for the things that
commissioning and all that other stuff?
Upfront.
I mean, is 20% not enough?
Well, no. But here's the thing: for the design phase, that's just the design of coming up with it. Now, tell me what entails the total design. Because here's the thing: we can't give 250 or 150 and have you go through and then you decide not to do it. There has to be a reasonable incentive so that maybe the 50,000 is the design, and then once you certify, maybe with DSA, you get the rest of it, that you've met the minimum requirements. Because there's a, sorry, Dennis, Mamie, then Lee.
What if the a higher percentage of the 250,000 was given at the design phase, but only a portion of that would be forgivable? In other words, only a portion of that would be used for analysis, and the rest would be applied to the overall grants. And if they didn't go for high performance grants in the
It would
final
be
phase,
reduced
then
in the back
it would be
then.
reduced. Yeah.
Mamie?
This is one of the key issues with financial hardship districts, in that to do green, to meet the criteria, it is more expensive. And as Bill pointed out, those who have local match funds choose to do this, and their board will commit to it and put in those extra funds. We may have a board that would love to commit to it, but we can't get enough money to do it. The catch-22 is that you've got to be at the front end with a lot of investment in design and investigation just to see what it will take to meet the criteria to get the additional funds. And then if you do get those additional funds, is it going to be enough money to actually implement what you've designed? And you don't know that until after you've gone through the process to determine what you have to do to meet the criteria.
Okay, so based on some of the stuff that I got from Bill and others in regards to kind of upfront costs, what if it's the 150 upfront, but only 50,000 is forgivable, because that still equals the 20% upfront design cost?
It's confusing.
May I?
I'm just throwing things out there. Lee, you had comment, and then Rob.
Simple formula.
Yeah, now that we're totally confused on it. Well, I'm just trying to work through it. And I actually was just doing a ditto on what Dennis said about portion or forgivable, but I don't know how you. They're still going to make good faith effort to do all these studies and do the feasibility. They're still going to expend the money. And then what if they decide, well, this isn't going to work? They don't have actually enough money for the construction. It's a real catch-22 for those districts. This is really difficult.
And that's part of the thing is I don't think the board meant 250 to go to figure it out. And I understand and want to include financial hardships, but I don't know what, Rob, you got some wise points?
No, the 250 is an incentive. I know you can't give it all to them initially, but to threaten them, which they have to be very, very careful, they're not going to play. They're not going to want to take the risk to build less of a school, which is already lesser of a school in the long run, should they find that it's not sustainable, no pun intended.
Teresa, and then Deborah?
I'm just going to put on my PGS green team hat, and the intent of we were doing the implementation of the S2004, and the intent is good, I think, to get people aware of what green is. And I think even though it would be money they can't return, it's money well spent for the district to explore what green is about, and that if we had some way to find out if they actually did that, some accountability, that would be helpful, so that they document an eco-charrette.
Or if they did a report kind of on the back end, if they didn't take the money.
Report to understand what they actually got out of the money, that would be valuable.
Deborah, then Rob?
I don't know. You said that there has been one financial hardship district do this, but it's been 2 years in DSA, so they haven't gone through and gone out to bid yet, right?
I'm going to have Lydia. Calusa is still in the works of getting their plan check for HPI. Can you comment?
Yes. The Calusa Department of Education.
County office?
Yeah, county office. They got their project stamped in December of this past year, but they submitted their projects to DSA 2 years ago. I don't know the reasons why it took them. No, for regular review. They finally just got stamped last December. But we started our HPI review 2 years ago when they originally came to DSA. And their reason is they're telling us that they haven't completed the HPI review because they're in hardship and they're waiting for money to continue on with their documentation.
And they're waiting for money from?
OPSC.
I don't know from whom. We didn't.
Probably OPSC. I'll just assume it's OPSC.
Maybe a bake sale.
Well, and that's my concern. You go back to the financial hardships, and I think most of the folks, like as Bill was saying, they're committed to it, and they have bond money to contribute to the project. I don't think in reality you're going to see many districts on a financial hardship come through the other side on building a green school.
So what if you say upfront grant 150 and that's forgivable with like a report if they don't move forward? Because that's reasonable, it's justifiable based on some of the data, the small amount of data we've seen, cost of commissioning, cost of design, but require, if they don't, a report as to kind of why and maybe factors that they looked at, because I think then if we have that data, there would be something tangible to look at.
Could it be,
Rob?
and I kind of just to dovetail on that, so you could say 150,000 up front. Should you not move forward with HPI, then call it an expenditure report of how the 150,000 was spent towards research, analysis, design.
Justification.
And if you can't, then that piece isn't forgivable, whatever the nexus is.
Teresa?
I'd say it would be valuable right now. We're in the process of being asked how schools are doing with green, and we're trying to find out how we can actually get some repository of that information. So that report would come to DSA if that's where we're keeping the repository of information, and log it as a school district that's small, that went about at least exploring the options of green, and maybe what their failures were in not being able to proceed. So I think it helps with data collection.
Okay. Lee, then Mamie?
I really like that idea. I just wouldn't want to see, unfortunately, I wouldn't want to see maybe OPSC go through that with such a fine-tooth comb and say, that's unallowable, that's unallowable, that's unallowable. Because there's a lot of studies or a lot of work that they might want to do. Teresa mentioned an eco-charrette.
Guess what I figure might happen is if we do this, that we then, while the regs are being done, have to do that report. I think it might come through the IMP committee what that would look like.
Okay.
I have a
Well, I'd like
suspicion.
to see us
sneaking
be
sus-
broad about what it would take in a community to because if they're already, like Rob said, building not a full school because they don't have enough money, and now you're asking that board and that community to accept even less square footage or less of this or that or the other thing to go green. It's a significant thing to ask.
There's some small things they can do, though. There's policies and of conservation they can put into place easily. Publish a booklet on policies. There can be education of their O&M staff. There can be policies on plug loads. There's many things they can do that do not cost money towards facilities, and I think if that is some of the outcomes, that would still be a good outcome.
Okay, we got Mamie, then Rob.
From a practical standpoint, if we go through this, we've got a hardship project, and I'm from a county office, so I'm speaking to smaller projects. Hardship school districts may have very large facilities, and that's going to be a little different situation in terms of cost to be able to figure out what you can do, and then the money to actually do it. So there's actually two parts to financial hardship, big projects, little projects. But if you're looking at it from what we would actually do, we go through the process, we look at it, and we say, okay, given the current bid climate, given this, that, and the other thing, all the things that we've picked, we think we can meet the points, because that's a pretty much engineering process. We think we can meet the points to get the additional money. Now we got to put it out to bid. At that point, we would have to put it out to bid with a series of deductive or additive alternates so that we can at least get the whole project and as much of the high performance as we can. At that point, if we can only do a certain amount of the high performance, then what happens? Because now we can't do all of it. We're not going to be able to fulfill what we've submitted to OPSC, but we are going to be able to do at least some of it. So at that point, then, what happens to the financial hardship district? because we've got, well, actually, I suppose we're okay there as well, because we have to go to bid, and then we do what we're doing now, and you have a caveat in your contract before you file your 5005, but you've still got an apportionment that's full and final.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't see that, so you've already gone through and you've already said we've met the minimum threshold of 20 or 21 points, but then you do the bid and it comes back and now certain things are too costly and you only have 17 points.
Mm-hmm.
So DSA.
We're really meeting the intent. It's just that we don't have the resources to meet it the whole way that everybody else can meet it.
I have a soft heart.
And it's but
So because regulation says has no provision for financial hardship and has no provision for this. So, Rob?
I was going to say something totally different, but now that Mamie pointed that out, it's not even a DSA issue, it's an OPSC issue. Yeah. You just change the nature of your project relative to your funding amount. So it's a scope change issue. So, well, not to that degree. You don't have the money, you do. Because if you...
Well, if it's within our grant, yeah, we do it all the time, right, because we want to save the project, and so you do what you got to do to get it to fit where you can get it fit. You're already designing it to fit to the best of your ability, which you would be doing under the high performance as well. But
so you'd already know how much money you're getting for high performance, and that's being included in that. But because, and it's
yes,
final, and you can't come back and get an extra bump up, and then
right,
if you don't meet the 20 points, what happens? Have we had that with HBI?
Well, and I don't want to be in a material and inaccuracy either for submitting a false 5004.
You'd have to resend and reapply, and everything would.
And then I'm out of line again.
And it's over.
Or go through the process like we've discussed before of scope change, and go through that process of getting scope change approved by DSA. I think, what did we say, DSA and OPSC before it's done?
But did the scope change, and it's been a long time since that discussion.
Man, I thought this was going to be easy.
Oh.
Well, we want to play.
Never easy.
For two reasons. One, we want to be like the big kids and play just like them. Number two, we also want to have the opportunities to save our operational funds, because that's ultimately the goal.
And ultimately, even if you only get 17 points, you're still saving on energy and everything else and whatnot. But
sure.
Hold on, we're not quite done. I know the audience wants to talk, but kind of Kaplan rules of order. Panel speaks. Any other suggestions on potentially how to look at this, handle it? Because this is a policy. 20 points, 27 points. We are adding in prerequisites, and giving points to those, which in effect brings in, what was discussed of kind of lowering the threshold, even though I know the 8% higher, energy conservation is part of that. Do the new points kind of take... Here's the thing. No pain, no gain, no risk, no, you don't know. Do we risk, do the 150 and see if this is a problem and come back and assess it for financial hardship and ride in, but it's a risk that counties might have to take of knowing that, I don't know, Bill?
Well, I think it's not, the problem of getting the money up front, I think, is not the major problem. Mm-mm. The problem is the back end.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And at the risk of sounding naive, why don't we just have the state pay the actual cost of doing the green building? Sorry.
Okay, that doesn't resolve the statute issue we have. Rob? Yeah.
That's the elephant right there. That's right in the middle of the room. The program doesn't pay for itself, and
yeah,
grant adequacy.
That's it.
Yeah, we couldn't apply. We had a difficult time, even as evidenced by the applications, to even consider it before there was the bump in criteria.
And there's no way that you could structure the apportionment in a manner that gives a scale. You got these minimum points, but if you meet these, you get this much more. You get Because you'd have to go back to the board at some point
Yeah.
and change the
It's-
apportionment, and you can't
it's an
get there.
entire, I mean, maybe a policy suggestion, potentially with the regs, and I'm so just like, have no basis, but is with financial hardship, after bid of such a case, you accept all that get points 15 and above. So you're required to have 20, but after bid,
Right.
it's not a material inaccuracy, and it's still considered full and final if you hit 15 points and above. I have no basis for any of this.
It would get people to apply and at least put some effort towards
Yeah,
the program.
Yeah, exactly. At least conceptually, we've got the opportunity to apply, as Rob said. And it gets back to the next thing that the allocation board wanted was, where's there some data to show that we're getting anything out of this?
I mean, and the intent is to bring people and to incentivize, and right now, county offices are really not playing. Financial hardship is really not playing. The intent is to green, and the intent is, I think if more counties do it, they might find more cost-effective ways to do it. Is it a forbidden switch? I mean, come on, HPI people who've been part of this drafting, am I like going into uncharted, forbidden territories? I mean, would it be so out of sync to write the language that if after bid, they have to come through and maybe there's some minor check with DSA if they drop from 20 to 19 points or something that's just a verifiable, it's not that they're doing it just to save money because there is no savings in financial, but, make sure they're not gaming some accountability. I mean. Yeah, Deborah.
Okay, this is really backwards. But it's the whole system and the whole process that makes this very difficult. So take Mamie for an example. If you knew exactly what your grant amount was going to be, if you knew exactly what your incentive was going to be, then you would design to those dollars instead of full-blown design, hoping you get there, and then finding out you're falling short. Mm-hmm. So I think that the process is backwards, and we set ourselves up for failure by doing that because you're trying to reach this number of points to get there, but then you don't have the money to build it. Mm-hmm. So if you knew up front, and if you're looking, I don't know how many financial hardships there are out there.
More and
say
more,
you have
more, and
yeah,
more.
and there's going to be more and more. But you look at Calusa, and maybe you take a small project and do it backwards and see how close you can get to making it happen.
Yeah, but that's unfortunately that's the whole process of
but that's the way we've always done it, and it continues to not work.
Yeah, let's go, Bill, Mamie, Dennis.
I had two things I wanted. I don't understand these projects that well, obviously, but it strikes me that a lot of the work that happens from county offices is putting special ed facilities, and these are hardship projects, right? So I was just reminded of the Green Summit in Pasadena and the green modular building that was outside. Did anybody else go to that? Teresa, you guys were there, right? So, just as an example of a small project, and you're putting let say it's an SH facility, a single modular building, and you could buy a brown box or whatever color box from a regular vendor, and that would be what the state would fund, or a green one, or a yellow one. Or you could buy the one that was the green modular building that probably met the 20-point threshold. It had a high efficiency unit, had natural daylighting, had low VOCs, et cetera. There's a cost differential there, right? And so as a kind of model for looking at very small projects under hardship for things like that, you kind of look at what the difference in cost is there and figure out how we fund that on the back end in the construction side as you go through that. That's a simple thing. The second piece that I just wanted to say is I'm not sure we're ready for prime time on this, and I would really like if we could go back to the high performance working group with Brian and the rest of the people at OPSC with the intent of the committee that we would like to try and create this program and have hardship be play in it, hardship districts be a part of the high performance schools program. We'd like to provide some way that we incentivize upfront so they can go through the design process like all the rest of us, and then figure out how you sort of solve the back end problem. And I don't think we all have total answers right now, so if we could refer it back to the committee. I hate to put it that way, but I just think we need to think about it some more a little bit.
But what I'm trying to do is make sure that we have enough direction and clarification that we can address this, because if we don't, the board is going to approve regs in May.
Yes, ma'am.
So this is now you are asking to delay things, and I will say Bill Savage asked for this to be delayed.
I want to go on the record.
So that I know timing is short, but I think yes, this is going to be part of that, but we need to get as much of this fleshed out now for that working group. Yes, Mamie?
I think if we just look at it in concept, first of all, I want to go back to what Bill was saying. If it's a small project where I would have the opportunities to go, for instance, for those facilities because I'm probably going to use modular anyway, then that's good. But a hardship school district that is out there with, a large number of facilities that are big, that's a little bit of a different discussion. I don't want to lose track of that concept. But conceptually, if you're hardship and you have some money up front that is a no harm, no foul amount where I can actually go in and say, okay, I know what I have to meet. You've given me the list. I know, like Deborah said, I've got to stay within this amount of money for my project anyway. So we truly do design to the money. There's no question about that. And you make whatever trade-offs you have to make. So we would do that anyway, but it gives us the money to go through and see, okay, if we do something to meet these criteria and now we cost it out, are we even close to being able to move forward to do it? So I think if we had that package, that opportunity, where if you reach that decision and you do your report or whatever and you say, I just can't do it. The estimates that I'm getting from my design professionals are way over my amount, no matter what we give and take.
Because, part of the question, and I'm coming in from my experience as a school board member, you do the design and we kind of cost it out. We look at our bond dollars. What do we have? What we can. Okay, this is coming in too high. We don't have the money. We readjust the design. And so I'm thinking, is it correct to say kind of at the design phase, if we gave the 150, you'd be costing things out. You kind of estimate how many points you're going to get. And you already know what kind of the bid climate is. So if you knew, like you were skinning the cat at 20 points and it was really no guarantee, then it's kind of the district, that's their call. If on the back end it only ends up they get 18 points, but I think we would rather have them look at it, and if you have 23, 24 points, based on if there's a little thing, you're still going to get the 20 points and get your grant. So, that's why part of it, I think, at least to collect data, because we're not going to solve the back end, we're not going to solve the bid problem, but if we do the no harm, no foul upfront $150,000 grant with a report, we'd at least get data. So if everything coming in is nobody can move forward, then we can, and I hate coming back and readjusting, but at least this is something that gives that up front. They know the expectations, you know what you're supposed to meet. The architects know how to work with things. We know, to a certain, not guarantee, but pretty close what the bid climate's going to be. It doesn't answer all of our problems, but I still think it gets us that we address the financial hardship in the right way. Dennis?
I agree with that, and I think that as part of that process that the $150,000 is paying for, the design process, you also need to include in there contingencies, which is a typical part of the design process. And I think part of that process is you look at the points that you're going to get. Those are sacred. Those aren't a part of any deductive alternate. You look for other things that could be reduced in case the bids come in high. You look at other alternatives and do that as part of your analysis up front before you make the commitment to go into the HPI.
I agree with what Dennis said.
Dennis, could I follow up with
Yeah, Fred?
So now the high performance is the top priority on anything. On the cut, but the way the structure you sent that, if to use a bad example, if it's my solar panels or the library goes because I need to maintain the integrity of the HPI. Is that?
Well, I think it becomes just like any other portion of a project that is generating the grant.
Right.
For instance, if you were to remove a classroom from a project, that is impacting the basis for which you applied for the grants. So it's the same thing with an HPI element. If you remove an HPI element, it's impacting the basis for your grant, and those things should be those things should be set before and not taken out during construction or during the bid process.
But that would still affect the grant, regardless of which point it was removed for hardship, right?
I'm sorry?
If the hardship went forward based upon a certain conceptual scope, right?
Right.
Reducing something in regardless of the way does affect the end dollar amount if you take out 2 classrooms or whatever, right? So, but that maybe we can.
We'll go Mamie, and then we'll take audience comments.
It would seem, in relation to the Fred and Dennis conversation, that I just interpreted it my way. If we are looking carefully during the design time, and we're monitoring, here's our programmatic requirements, here's what it's going to physically cost to do those, and what are the takeoffs, and then here's our high performance requirements.
Knowing that it's based on grants.
Right. That we're doing that at the point in time before we go to DSA and before we go to CDE. So that once we go to CDE, then we're presenting you with, here's our program, and this is our plan, and you're going to sign off like you would ordinarily anyway. So if there's something in there that doesn't look quite right, we're going to know. But at that point in time, if we've
You're not at OPSC or full and final, so you can still back out and do the expenditure report.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So there is still time. I mean, at DSA, you could get there and still pull back and do the expenditure.
Well, and really what it gets down to, if we think we've got it, we've done the Emily building or whatever it is, and we think we can nail this with all of the things that we've got, the bid climate is going to control it in the end. So if we're really close, that's when it kicks us off into that other category of discussion. But if we at least, if we're going to move this along and we at least have the opportunity to try to get there, it would be a good thing, recognizing that if all of our estimates come in and there's just no way we can hold our program requirements and do the high performance, then there's no harm, no foul to us. And then now we just go back, but you've got that information.
Tien, public comments, come on up. I know Patty you had, Whale you had your hand, Anna?
Yes, based on all the discussion, I feel that a lot of questions really based on an assumption that there's no certainty regarding the fund adequacy on the HP component. We know that there's already the HP project, they are already working. And now we even raised all the point and the funding for that. And so this connected to the next item, the data collection. So that will be a circle and to see if that's adequate for that. And then I think after we raised the point, the funding, the HP program is already in a better shape for the school district. And financial hardship, 100% supported by the state funding. So I think it's much workable and it can be come back and then to see the data. Yeah.
Okay. Anna?
Ana Ferreira, County School Facilities Consortium. Number one, I want to have this problem. I think our folks want to have the ability to try to do the design, try to make their facilities greener and more high-performing. As I've said ad nauseum, many are located in Central Valley and areas where this type of building is most needed and is very educating for the communities that they serve and the students. So I would say, 150, the piece that we're talking about, let us have that problem, let us go forward. I am concerned, though, about the report afterwards and the concern about having an MI or something like that because, that's the piece that I think we should be very concerned about, so that we aren't dinged at the end, because you said no harm, no foul. Let's make it truly no harm, no foul.
Well, I think the board's intent is that if we were to do something like this, there would have to be a report, but not subject to MI, because if there is an MI, you're already going to find it on everything else.
Right.
Because if they were intending to defraud, that's just going to come out. But I mean, here's the thing: if you do reasonably what you need to do, you're going to have the design and the architect certify, and you're going to be able to show. You're just going to be able to show that. So I think if those elements, we decide what the must elements are for accountability, if it's on there and it can be verified, I think that shows accountability of state dollars to make sure that we have that, and school districts aren't just doing it for the extra money and then running.
So we would support that concept.
Okay. Sean?
I just want to make sure that the regulations are addressed to reflect that, because MIs don't require intent to defraud.
Yeah.
So we would need to address it.
Any other public comment on this? If there's public comment, come on up. Richard, you're never bashful. Come on.
Well, it's summer as far as I'm concerned. It's Hawaiian time. I've got to think about being in Hawaii, where I want to be. Thank you. Richard Gonzalez and Associates. I'd like to just add a little bit more to what Anna just finished saying, and that is, although I see very much a need to provide information that the money was in fact spent, the process so far is still that they review the entries and define what is eligible and ineligible expenditures. Okay, and if I may say what I thought I heard at the State Allocation Board by one of the members, I thought they said that the role of defining what is going to be audited in that direction was located in one particular office. So I'm concerned that I would like to see the audit report 5006 turned in saying, this is what you spent on your on your HPI. You got $150,000. Here's how I account for the $150,000, totally separate from the rest of the SFP expenditures. And then, of course, the report, so we know why did it happen and why didn't it go. Because I think that's a very good point, that we do need to know why we can't make these fly.
So but part of what I see is, and I hear this, but for purposes of discussion, if the board such approves the $150,000 and the data, then we come back and discuss what the report is to look like. Just like the expenditure report, the 5005, 5006 funding, everything that we change regulation-wise or create a report, then it would come back to the IMP for that.
Totally understand. Thank you.
Because here's the thing, even if the regs go into place, if a project comes in to use this, it's still going to be months down the road before we get there, so it doesn't matter if we submit different OAL regulations to implement this part, because the timing-wise is we're still going to have that time before it comes in. So I just want to say that, yes, this conversation will continue on that regard. So any other public comments in regards to this? Dennis?
Do we need another form for detailing it? Can't we just say in the regulations that the district will detail the expenditures?
Guess what our next discussion is? Because the SAB directed us to collect data. So how are we going to collect that data? But here's the thing: if you're getting the 150 and you don't use it, yes, we need some form for transparency and accountability, no matter what. Yeah.
Oh, nice. Got it.
All righty. Any more comment on this? So actually, as the time is getting close, let's do lunch from 12:20 to 1:20, and I am serious, 12:20 to 1:20. I know I'm killing you, but we got a lot to get through. So come back with suggestions on how we collect data and review the discussions for seismic as well.
I told my husband I got to eat something in the